Hello, and good evening. This is Mike's Mets Podcast with your host, Mike Pashota. Thank you very much for listening in. Today we'll be going over a few segments, including the Mets' recent spring training signings, Keith Hernandez's ongoing contract dispute with SNY and the Wilpons, and finally a new segment I'd like to introduce called Random Met Profiles, where we're going to discuss a random Met through the history of the franchise and talk about them just to give a breakdown of their career. So, hope you enjoyed the following show. Before we go any further, I just want to say if you want to support this channel, please follow us on Spotify or Anchor. The podcast name is Mike's Mets Podcast on both channels. You can also follow us on YouTube, the channel name being once again Mike's Mets Podcast. If you were so inclined, please comment, like, and subscribe on that YouTube channel. And finally, please follow me on Twitter at Mike's Mets Pod, all one word. And if you were so inclined as well to like any of the posts I might be putting up on Twitter, I'd greatly appreciate it. So the first thing I want to talk about today is about Keith Hernandez, beloved Mets broadcaster, still has not come to an agreement on a contract with SNY. So as of right now, he is still not signed. We have no word as to when that might change or if it might change. The hope certainly is that there will be some negotiation, or rather continued negotiation between Hernandez and SNY. But as of right now, Mike Puma of the Post reporting that there is still a gap between SNY and Keith Hernandez in contract talks. Hernandez was offered a new deal, rejected it, and counteroffered. SNY has not yet responded with another offer. And there's really two camps about this, really, is that is Hernandez trying to back out of any kind of deal, and is he trying to negotiate a contract that's going to offer him less time, fewer games to broadcast, while still paying him the requisite amount of money that he's looking to receive? And the other camp are the Wilpons once again getting involved in this and causing a problem where there didn't need to be one. It feels like something that you want to keep your beloved broadcaster happy and signed, regardless of what he's asking for. Yet there still feels like this continued problem with the Wilpons, and Keith Hernandez has made it clear that he is kind of tired of announcing. He went on Tucker Carlson's show and he had made some moaning and groaning about how he does not like watching baseball as much as he did in the past. That's just to be expected. They're longer games and he's required to watch them all and give his opinions on the game. That's his job. Now, he's been announcing on a full-time basis for 17 seasons. It can take a toll. I understand if he's really looking more to kind of cut back on the amount of time that he's spending in the announce booth and maybe try to work it out where he can do maybe something a little bit less, maybe something where he can be off the majority of the time and they can bring in someone else. However, it should be noted that Keith, in tandem with Gary Cohen and Ron Darling, is the greatest announce booth in baseball, bar none. And I really believe that. I'm not just being a homer. I absolutely believe that that is the perfect announce combination. And as great as Cohen and Darling are together, and that is an excellent combination, Hernandez just keeps it light. He has great chemistry with both Gary Cohen and Ron Darling. And the result is a very enjoyable broadcast that we, as Met fans, kind of take for granted. We just assume that every day we're going to get great performances from our announce booth. And the sad fact is that a lot of major league teams don't have that kind of entertaining broadcast team that is able to bring laughter, knowledge. There's never been a situation where I've gone into a Met broadcast and come out of it feeling like the Gary Cohen, Ron Darling, or Keith Hernandez does not know what they're talking about. I always feel very confident in what they are saying to me is fact. And I know that they are as far as they can be as Met broadcasters, very objective. They have given everything in terms of their perspective and opinions very fairly. The same cannot be said for some other broadcast teams, namely the ones across town for the New York Yankees. They don't have nearly that kind of perspective, and oftentimes it can feel like, you're just kind of, you're taking your shots at the opposing team. Whereas SNY's announcer team has always treated it very much like we're trying to be as objective as possible while still clearly rooting for the home team. And that's something that you really can't put a price on, and I hope that the Wilpons are able to keep that in mind, the fact that they don't own this team anymore, and while they do own the still SNY, you have to feel like this is like something that it should be very clear and easy to get to, and just acquiesce to his demands. And it just continues this string of Wilpon hatred, and it's been now renewed. We now feel like, again, we have to deal with this constant penny pinching. Don't forget the fact that you just sold their team for a few $1 billion. Maybe loosen up the purse strings a little bit, Wilpon boys, and maybe give your Hall of Fame player, a guy who just got put into the Met Hall of Fame, just got in after how many seasons? Could never do it while the Wilpons were doing it. And it just kind of brings back to the fact that the Wilpons and Hernandez didn't have a great relationship. I think they were satisfactory, but there was a lot of things that came out recently about Hernandez was not allowed on the field during batting practice. The Wilpons forbid it. It was, for some reason, something where they felt like Hernandez couldn't get involved in that and speak to the players and maybe offer some advice. They didn't want it, and that was the way it worked. So there's always been this kind of strained relationship a little bit in terms of the employer-employee relationship, but you really have to kind of move on at this point. And the fans are now clamoring, Steve Cohen, please buy us and why. We don't want to deal with the Wilpons anymore. I fully support it. Why would you want to deal with the Wilpons anymore, especially when they're being this obtuse and difficult? Get beyond this point. Fix it, get it in, and I want that trio ready come opening day. There shouldn't be this back and forth. Just get it done. Whatever he's asking for, do it. It's not that hard. Okay, let's move on to spring training invites for the upcoming and very, very soon to be upcoming spring training. And we've had a lot of invitees. It is 15, to my knowledge. Yes, 15 invitees. And I'm not going to go over every invitee. I'm just going to point out the ones that came to my attention. Starting with Eric Orze, the minor league pitcher. He's was invited to join. And Orze's name kind of jumps out because he's had a productive run with the team, with their minor league teams for the last few years. And you have to kind of look back into his history, but he's had a very successful run, and his name may not jump to the top of the list in terms of how successful relievers. I definitely believe Eric Orze is going to make an appearance with the major league team at some point this season. He's going to be called up. He has what feels like all the tools at this point, and he delivered in back-to-back seasons in 2021 and 2022 really good numbers. In 2022, his ERA jumped a fair amount, up to from 3.08 in 2021 to 4.83 in 2022. Yet, if you look at his peripherals, namely his strikeout rate and walk rate, they did not change. They were almost identical to the previous season. And that really just says that he just had trouble with one thing, and that one thing is pretty obvious if you just look at his stats, which is that he gave up 6 more home runs than he did the previous year, and 6 home runs given up as a reliever, it's a lot. That difference can feel like it's an enormous amount, and it was. It was really the only issue that he had all of last year, and other than that, he continues to put guys away with regular. There's really nothing that you look at his stats, and you say, like, this guy has great stuff. I mean, 12.1 strikeout rate per 9 innings in 2021. He followed that up with a 12.3 strikeout rate in 2022. Great stuff. He looks like $1 million out there, and I firmly believe that he will be making an appearance in the 2023 season for the New York Mets. So moving on from Eric Orze, another guy who jumped out to me was T.J. McFarland. And T.J. McFarland has bounced around the league for a few years now. McFarland's left-handed reliever and has been featured on a few teams, most recently the St. Louis Cardinals, for which 2 years ago in 2021, he delivered an excellent under-the-radar season for them, and they firmly, very much appreciated his performance for them. So you're hoping that's going to be the case. He did not pitch well in 2022, 6.61 ERA, a strikeout rate that was not really doing anything for a lot of people. And he's never been a strikeout pitcher. He's just a guy who kind of one of those battlers. The reason I point T.J. McFarland out as a non-roster invitee to spring training is Buck Showalter very familiar with McFarland. McFarland had pitched with the Baltimore Orioles originally from 2013 to 2016, so 4 years, all under the supervision of one Buck Showalter. So Showalter very familiar with T.J. McFarland. I don't know how that might play in. Keep in mind, a left-handed reliever, guys who usually pays to keep available, particularly ones who are veterans, solid veterans, definitely worth keeping around. I don't think he'll make the team. There's just too many relievers that are in the Met bullpen. But again, a name to keep in mind when we're going to be looking at cuts, and T.J. McFarland may go farther than others. One other name before I move on to the two most important names invited to spring training is going to be Tim LeCastro, who Yankee fans might remember most recently from his performance with the team very recently, actually. So recent, it was last year. Tim LeCastro, noted for really one thing, which is that he is a spectacular base stealer and runner with amazing speed. There's something compared recently, him and Brandon Nimmo, and the two of them are very comparable in terms of their around the base speed. This is a guy who, if he gets one into the gap, he can probably turn it into a triple. It's really just been a matter of him actually hitting the ball has been sort of an issue for him during his long, extended up and down run with the major league clubs and minor league clubs that he's played for. Again, most recently the New York Yankees, but we also saw him make appearances with the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Arizona Diamondbacks. So he's been bouncing around for a long time. The most action he had seen was with the Diamondbacks in 2019, where he had 1 home run, 17 RBIs, 17 stolen bases, and he did this all in just under 250 plate appearances. So he appeared in 91 games that year, and he was just a frequent use off the bench. LeCastro is intriguing as a bench player. The Mets bench is pretty crowded as it is, so there is the question of, can this guy make the team? As a fourth outfielder, his job doesn't seem to be available because they have recently signed Tommy Pham. Tommy Pham would seem to be the ideal choice to be the fourth outfielder going forward, but could LeCastro come in as a possible utility outfielder, or if something happens to Tommy Pham? It is a possibility, and it doesn't hurt, I think, to always have a guy who can steal a base, run really well. Those types of players are valuable, and they can make their presence known. So worth keeping an eye on Tim LeCastro and his progress over the course of spring training. And I'm going to move on now to the final two players that were invited, and I'm going to talk about them both at the same time. So the two players that I want to highlight are going to be Kevin Parada and Alex Ramirez. And Parada's name should come up as a pretty big bell to a lot of Met fans. This is a guy who was the Mets' number 1 draft pick last year. He was the 11th overall pick in the first round of the 2022 draft, and played through his first full season last year. He appeared in 60 games. hitting 20. Sorry, not sorry. He appeared in 52 games, hit 9 home runs, 42 RBIs. I'm sorry, I'm looking at his Georgia Tech numbers. What am I looking at here? So his final season in Georgia Tech, I'm sorry, I apologize. I was reading his college numbers. So his final season in Georgia Tech really, jumped out to a lot of people, and he is, by all accounts, a really professional hitter. 26 home runs and 80 RBIs. He hit 361 during that season. He's got all the tools. In his brief run last year, where you saw him make appearances in rookie ball and A ball, he batted 275, 1 home run, 8 RBIs. The point that makes it interesting with Parada is that he is a catcher, and the Mets already have the number one catching prospect in all of baseball, which is Francisco Alvarez. So Parada is going to have to make a positional switch at some point if the Mets intend to keep him with the team, and by all accounts, they're very impressed with him. He has terrific tools, is a great hitter, really just a polished prospect, and a guy who is already being viewed as a top prospect by Baseball America. They've ranked him the 50th overall prospect going into 2023, and this is for a guy who has spent very little professional time, so they clearly anticipate big things for Kevin Parada. This is going to be an interesting view just to see how he is going to be able to work during spring training, and how he may fare against maybe somewhat older pitchers, got other players that are trying to make the team. So I'm intrigued. I'll be interested in seeing how he does fare. We'll keep an eye on Kevin Parada. And lastly, I want to talk about Alex Ramirez. And Alex Ramirez, a name that may not jump out to a lot of people, but has very quietly been jumping up the prospect rankings these last few years with the New York Mets. And Ramirez is looking like he could be a potential corner outfielder option for the Mets sooner than later. He has been rising through. He's very young, it should be pointed out. He just turned 20 a few weeks ago, January 13th. So there is certainly a lot of time for him to continue growing into his role. He just punctured the Baseball America Top 100 this year, now being ranked at 92. So he is still very raw. There's a lot of intrigue over his bat, which is starting to look more and more advanced as the time goes by. He is very strikeout heavy. He struck out 122 times in just 121 games. So you're looking at a guy who's kind of all or nothing, very typical from a lot of players of his type. We know that he has good power. He flashed it with 11 home runs already as a 19-year-old. And stole 21 bases. So he's got good speed. However, he also was caught stealing 16 times. So questions about his base running skills and base stealing skills. Certainly has the speed, but really more of a how he picks and chooses his spots, and that is kind of an issue. But the power seems legit. He doubled 30 times, 7 triples, 11 home runs, 71 RBIs. Certainly looks like great stuff. He finished with a 782 OPS during that season, over A-ball and high A-ball, so finishing up with the Brooklyn Cyclones last year, and certainly hits his weight. I don't think he's a guy who may jump out to a lot of people, but looks like a guy who could be with the team by maybe 2024, 2025. That would be my guess for his ETA. If he continues rising up, I assume he's going to start this year probably in Double A ball, just to see how he performs, and if he's performing well, you might see him in Triple A and then Major Leagues, and it would work well in terms of their timeline for Mark Canha potentially departing the team by then. So they will be looking at him. He's certainly also a prospect that's going to throw some interest from other teams. I would assume that he's going to be viewed highly as a raw but certainly serviceable prospect who has the potential to grow into something even better. So we'll be keeping an eye on Alex Ramirez as well. So keep an eye out for him. So finally, I want to talk about a new segment that I'm going to be doing for this podcast, which is going to be called Met Player Profiles of the Past. And this segment is going to involve me talking about a random Met I have chosen to speak about from any point in the Met history over a period of time, from the start of the franchise in 1962 to 2022. So going over that period of time, I'm going to just randomly pick somebody to talk about. And the first player I've chosen to talk about is going to be Ike Davis. And Ike Davis, you might be thinking, is a weird choice to be talking about as a player profile. Didn't have a particularly long run with the Mets. Only played with the team from 2010 to 2014. And had an interesting run. He's basically a test case or a study in how a prospect can look like the most attractive possible addition to a team. It can look really good on paper and fit in perfectly in terms of how you want somebody to fit in. And then it can just very quickly go from, yes, this guy is going to be a cornerstone piece of the puzzle for the next decade plus, to let's get this guy out of here as quickly as possible because he is ruining this team. And that is basically Ike Davis in a nutshell. And the Mets had drafted Ike back in 2008. He was the Mets' first-round pick, 18th overall of that draft. And Ike's draft stock was pretty high. He was considered a highly touted first base prospect coming out of college in Arizona State University, and expected to play a significant period of time with the Mets. There was no question that he was considered the first baseman of the future for the team, and that he was going to very quickly jettison up the rankings. I was looking through prospect analysis for Ike Davis, and I came across this very intriguing Baseball America article during the course of my research, where I was trying to find out what exactly was Ike viewed as in the world of baseball at the time. Now, I was much younger at the point, so I wasn't quite sure about Ike's prospect rankings and if he was going to be considered a top-tier prospect or not. So I wanted to look back and look at, and there's this very intriguing profile in the final mock draft for the 2008 draft by Baseball America, and they put in this notation, not for Davis, but for the New York Mets, who were picking 18th that year. And they put in this profile blurb saying, despite their financial muscle, the Mets will accede to MLB's bonus guidelines and focus on talent that can rise through their depleted farm system in a hurry. And it's an interesting sentence to talk about because, one, despite their financial muscle is a very funny start of the sentence, because in 2008, we did not know that the Mets were basically playing with a house of cards. Their financial system was at any point looked like it was going to all kind of fall apart, and this is just a couple of short years just before Bernie Madoff and all the disaster of that. So it's looking back pretty humorous. So it didn't age particularly well until recently when the Mets were bought by Steve Cohen. So this was interesting to think about. Davis was picked by Baseball America to go the pick prior to that with the Toronto Blue Jays, and they expected they were going to go with Davis, who was considered, per their words, a first-round caliber first baseman. He was one of the few who had a chance to play a more difficult position, so they were expecting Davis to go either 17th, and he ended up falling to the Mets at 18th. Their original projected pick for the Mets was Christian Friedrich, who I was looking through his baseball reference page. It's not the best. I mean, Ike Davis's is not great, but he definitely had a better career than Christian Friedrich. So the Mets did pick the right guy in that case. And Toronto Blue Jays, I believe, had taken Brett Lawrie with that pick.
So the Mets probably came out at the best out of all those of the Mets and Blue Jays. I'm going to say the Mets came out of that okay. Davis from that point on proceeded through the Mets uh, minor league system very quickly. He was drafted. He basically went right to lower A ball, and Double A, Triple A. And he did this all with about 2 years. So if I was going to compare him to somebody, I would compare him to Pete Alonso. Alonso also went very quickly through the Mets farm system before he eventually came up in 2019. And Ike Davis was very much hyped at that point. And when he was coming up, and in 2010, there's just the expectation as to when he was going to arrive, and kind of transform the Mets' first base fortunes, who had been struggling to find an adequate replacement for Carlos Delgado at that point. Delgado was bouncing through. He was battling injuries. There was no real word as to whether or not Delgado was going to be able to be a starter again, and they were experimenting with a few other options. This is where Lucas Duda started making his appearances also, and they had decided to keep Lucas Duda in left field in order to make room for Ike Davis, who played the majority of that year and had a great rookie year. It was a really not really celebrated, but he played very well. Played 147 games that year. Finished with 19 home runs, 71 RBIs, 33 doubles. So definitely was showcasing a real power bat at that point, and finished with a 791 OPS for the season. He ultimately finished, I believe, 7th in Rookie of the Year voting that year. Just double check. And yeah, 7th in Rookie of the Year voting that year. And again, was among the better grouping of rookie players that season. So the Mets felt like they had their piece going forward. And the next year was an interesting one because he starts off at an incredible rate. Through his first 36 games, he is batting .302. He has a 925 OPS, has 7 home runs, 25 RBIs, and he's just like he's just mowing through. He does not look like he's having anything that's approaching a sophomore slump. Was by all accounts looked like a guy who could be expected to be a major force for the Mets that year, and the Mets were playing pretty well in 2010, and through the first 36 games, and it looks like the Mets might have a chance of making the postseason. This is through 36 games, not something that most people expected the Mets were going to continue any momentum through that point, but people felt generally positive. I remember thinking Ike Davis looked like a guy who he looks like he belonged there, and I felt really great about him. And then a major problem happens, and this is probably where everything kind of falls apart for Ike. He has an injury. One other thing I want to mention, this was a little tidbit I was reading through on his various web pages. He started the season by establishing a Mets record. And this is a record where he had at least 1 RBI in 9 of his first 10 games, which had not been done at that point. And it just established him as this is a guy who, had he stayed healthy, he was probably going to drive in over 100 batters that year. He was just a natural run producer and guy who could really get in, drive in runners whenever they were in scoring position. Great player. And on May 10th, he gets into this freak accident where he is tracking a fly ball. This is just an infield fly ball, and somehow gets entangled with David Wright. I remember watching this live, and I was like, what the hell happened? Like, how did this even occur? But it happened I remember thinking, it doesn't seem like a bad injury. He came up limping. He's not really and he's holding his leg, and he's got the trainers out there. The trainers are looking at him and saying, okay, something going on. And then there was after the game, they were like, he's got he sprained his ankle. There's a bruise. He's fine. Basically was the general consensus was he was okay. And that actually, I diagnosed it at first. Just reading through the report here. they diagnosed him as a strained calf. That was it. They were like, yeah, he's okay. He came up limping. They thought he was going to be back within maybe a day or two. It eventually turned out to be a really severe injury that they actually thought he was going to need surgery at one point, and then he basically was going to keep rehabbing the ankle. He does not return after that point. This is like again just an ankle injury. He was done, and it's one of those things where you're like, oh, this not great. It ultimately did not really play into his career as a major factor for any kind of downturn for him, but it was an omen if you're going to look at it like that, as, oh, okay, this could go bad fast, and you're wondering, okay, what's going on? Things don't really improve for Ike. The next year is basically his career highlight. He's diagnosed with valley fever, which is a weird thing. It's common in the American Southwest, which is where Ike had been playing baseball for the last few years with Arizona State. So that was the one thing that you're like, okay, how is that possible that he got that? It eventually kept going for a very long time. It was going to be in his system. Valley fever does not really go away over the course of time. It just kind of remains in your system for a long time. And he was dealing with this all while still rehabbing his ankle injury, and he was spending these off seasons in Phoenix. There was a chance that that's where he had contracted that particular off season. The end result of this is that Ike Davis plays the entire 2012 season, and as I said before, is a career highlight for him. Essentially, he plays healthy. He shows really no ill effects from the ankle injury, and even hits 32 home runs and drives in 90 batters for the season. The 32 home runs was interesting because no one had hit 32 home runs at that point for some time with the Mets. This was during the early years of Citi Field, so because no one could hit any home runs at Citi Field, again, great job, Will Bonds. This was it was kind of special, and there honestly aren't that many 30 home run seasons in Met history anyway. So when he hit 32 home runs, people were like, "Whoa, okay, great job, Ike. This is great." Again, he was really young. He was only about 25 years old, 25 and 20 between 25 and 26 that year, and this was, again, looked like a great precursor of him being a consistent power threat for the next foreseeable future. He, unfortunately, everything besides 32 home runs is not looking great. He's striking out a lot, 141 times that year. His walk rate really dips from the previous seasons. In 2010, he had walked 72 times in 147 games. In 2012, that number is dipped down to 61. So he's got an increasing strikeout rate and a decreasing walk rate. He's batting in a way that is not really very conducive to a good batting average. He finishes the year batting 227, and this is a big drop off from, he was batting 302 going into 2011 before he gets hurt. So you can see that this is not really, it's a downturn, but with some positives, basically with 32 home runs. What we know from that point on is Ike kind of goes into a significant slump, and they have to send him down in 2013 in the following year. So 2013, he's struggling badly. This is probably the worst stretch of his career. He finishes the year batting 205, and that's really only because he's able to kind of right himself in the second half. He finishes the season batting 286 in the second half of the season. So ultimately for the year, bats 205, only because he bats 286 in the second half. Not great. He does this only over the course of 103 games. They have to send him down. And then the following year, this is it for him. 2014, he comes in, and I recall this very distinctly, was in 2014, he was working in a platoon with Lucas Duda, and Duda had come in that year, the year prior, 2013, and was seeing a lot more reps at first base, looked like a guy who you could potentially count on a lot more, and hit great. 15 home runs during that period, drove in 33 batters, and people have a very positive influence, very positive feelings about Lucas Duda. I've noticed over the years people just really liked him as a player, and they didn't want to see him go. Unfortunately, it was just a situation where the Mets were not going to be contending later on. And I don't want to go into a Lucas Duda tangent, but Lucas Duda was a really positive player. People really responded to him, and Ike was trending in the wrong way at that point, and people were very adamant that. And by people, I'm gonna say Met fans. They were like, "Get this guy out of here. He's really screwing them over at this point." And Ike's struggles notwithstanding, Ike had played very well for them for different periods, but it was clear that he was going to be trending in the wrong direction. So they have to make a move and trade him off at that point. And they do trade him. Early on that season, Ike ultimately only appears in 12 games that year, and of those 12 games, he's not really hitting the stuffing out of the ball. He finishes in that point. He's batting .208. He has 1 home run, only five RBIs driven in. So not really hitting his way. Again, very young at this point. He was only 27 years old at this point, and they had that. There was no point to keep him on from that situation on. Like it was clear that Duda was going to be the future of the Mets at that position because they needed to keep him in that line. And Duda has a fantastic year that year. It should be noted in 2014, Duda actually hits 30 home runs, drives in 92 batters. And this is basically an Ike Davis season. This is the season that Ike Davis needed to be having for him to kind of like stay with the team. But they trade him off early that year. The expectation really being that the Mets needed to kind of remove him from the situation, just to kind of avoid any kind of controversy that was going to take over the stretch for the entire season. So moving on from that, it felt good, and I remember feeling like Ike Davis, thanks for playing. I enjoyed him, but there were problems. My dad had the theory that Ike Davis couldn't see. I remember very distinctly his whole theory, which was that Ike blinked a lot when he was batting, and my dad theorized that he may need glasses. I don't know how rooted in fact that was, but that was always his theory. He always stood by that. So it's as good a theory as any that for why Ike just flatlined from that point on. He does not do well with the Pittsburgh Pirates, who he was traded to that season. And he plays the majority of the year as a starter, appears in 131 games that year. Finishes 10 home runs, 46 RBIs, just not really great. And Pittsburgh does not choose to keep him on. They do release him. He's not released. They don't release him. He's actually purchased from the Pirates clean by the Oakland Athletics, who keep him on for a season, but then ultimately grant him free agency. And then from there, it's just a lot of minor league deals with a lot of teams, and he is out of the league by 2018. He will not. He does not. His final Major League Baseball game appearance is with the New York Yankees, and his last game is June 24th, 2016, per Baseball Reference. Does not make an appearance. He does not have at bats that game. He was a pitch runner, and that's it for him. He's gone by 2016 as his final game in Major League Baseball. He stuck around for a couple more years trying to make it with a couple other teams, but ultimately retires in 2018. So his career is incredibly short. I mean, and remember, he was young. His final game is before he turns 30. That's insane. So his run, very short. And again, this is the reason why I decided to profile him was with all the talk about the Mets prospects and guys like Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty, Valencia, Alex Ramirez, all these highly hyped up prospects, Kevin Parada. It's worth noting that sometimes it can go really bad. I mean, it can start off really good and then just go really bad really fast. You certainly don't hope for it. I really don't want Brett Beatty to go that way. I don't want Francisco Alvarez to go that way. I don't want any of the Mets prospects to go that way. I hope they're cornerstone players for the foreseeable future. But there is always the chance that you're going to Ike Davis it and start off really strong, then get valley fever and somehow and get into a entanglement that somehow sprains your ankle and you're done for the entire season. And that's your career highlight. That's 3 years where you're just did fairly well, but didn't really set the world on fire. And unfortunately, that was you don't think about it at the time, but he was very young. People thought it was going to be just the start of it, and it really was the start and end of it very quickly. It's amazing how fast he had gone and disappeared. It's less than 15 years ago he made his major league debut. That's insane. He makes his debut in 2010, and you could for Met fans who are younger, who are the younger variety, you'd be forgiven for not really remembering Ike Davis because he was such a in and out came in hot and then was out just as came in not hot. He did not come out cold hot. He left very cold. But Ike Davis, worth remembering. I do think about Ike Davis every once in a while and think this guy really had it. A Jewish player also has to be remembered for that. But I wish that Ike had had a better run. Ultimately, what we have left with Ike Davis is Ike is kind of just a footnote in history. He left. He had to leave in order for Lucas Duda to bloom. And Duda played a great role for the Mets for the next few years. Again, I don't want to go off with Lucas Duda. Lucas Duda may be a player profile. I do have a later time. But that'll do it for Ike Davis. And Ike Davis, I do wish him well. I really hope that whatever he's doing right now, he's happy with what he's doing. And I would like to see him maybe in a future Old Timers game, just because he did have a memorable 2.5 seasons with the team. And unfortunately, it cratered after that. But I do wish Ike Davis well, and I hope he's doing well. So that's going to do it for this episode of Mike's Mets Podcast. Thank you very much for listening, if you are listening. And please be sure to, as I've said before, reach out if you want to, and leave likes, comments, and subscribe and follow to any of my social media channels. Thanks very much for listening, and you take care.